Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Author Mitch Albom visits Theater J in Washington, D.C. tomorrow night to discuss his newest novel, The Stranger in the Lifeboat. He joined me to discuss the inspiration for the novel, as well as his best-selling career from Tuesdays with Morrie to the 5 People You Meet in Heaven. Mitch Albom, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jason. Thank you.
Now, we are talking, you have a brand new book coming out called The Stranger in the Lifeboat, which is going to be a perfect, gift as the holidays, a little stocking stuffer here as the holidays approach. Why don't you just tell us the basic premise of the book?
Well, the book, it's out now, actually, and it just came out. It's called The Stranger in the Lifeboat, and basically, there's a luxury yacht owned by one of the richest people in the world, and he invites all his rich celebrity friends and business people out for a 1-week excursion out in the Atlantic off the coast of Africa. And before they come back in, mysteriously, the boat explodes and it's wiped out. Everybody is killed, and only 10 people managed to work their way to a life raft, 5 of whom were the rich guests and 5 of whom were staff, help on the boat, cooks and deckhands. And they're in this raft for 3 days. Nobody comes looking for them. They're running out of food and water. There are sharks in the water. They're desperate for help. They're crying out in their own different ways. And then suddenly they see a body floating in the water, and they pull it into the boat. And it's this young guy, very average, nondescript looking guy. And they pepper him with questions, and there's no answer. And finally, one of the passengers says, "Well, thank the Lord we found you." And he says, "I am the Lord." And that basically begins the book. Those are the first few pages of the book. And then it's all about what happens as these people are out in this raft with this guy who claims to be God, but doesn't look the part, doesn't act the part. He gets hungry, he gets thirsty, he falls asleep a lot. And they say to him, "Oh, okay, sure, right, yeah, you're God. So what are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, haven't you been calling me? I came because you called me." And they say, "Oh, so you're going to save us?" And he says, "Well, I can only save you if everyone in this boat believes I am who I say I am at the same time." And it becomes a parable about help and what we believe in about help coming to us, whether we only accept help if it looks exactly like we expected it and when we expected it, or if we kind of see the universe in a bigger way.
Wow, so definitely some spiritual themes here for the holiday season for sure. Now, how did you come up with the idea? Were you reading were you reading the Gospels with Jesus walking on the water, or did you watch Life of Pi?
No, nothing like that. I try to come up with ideas that I want to explore before I come up with plots. And when I wrote The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, I didn't start with a plot about meeting people in heaven. I started with the idea that I wanted to write a book that showed that everybody matters, even though people think that they don't count or they die without having affected the world, that everybody affects the world in some way, even if they've affected only one person. Then I wrapped the whole story about an amusement park and 5 people in heaven who you meet, who tell you what your life is about and all that. But that was after the idea. In this one, the idea was, like I started to say, especially in the last 2 years during pandemic, we've been asking for help in a lot of ways. We've been asking, keep our jobs, our businesses, please don't let us get sick. My relative is in the hospital, please don't let them die. And it occurs to me that we expect our help to sort of arrive like we ordered a sandwich in a deli. We give it a couple of minutes, and then if it doesn't come out exactly the way we want it, we get upset. But I've learned in my life that a lot of times when you think your prayers aren't being answered or the universe is not responding to you, you wait 5 years or 10 years and you look back and you say, well, that thing didn't go the way I wanted it to, but actually then because of that, this happened, and then this happened. I ended up meeting the woman who became my wife, and then we had our kids. And so I guess when I look back on it, that was kind of the best thing that could have happened to me. Well, if it was the best thing that could have happened to you 10 years from now, it's probably the best thing that could happen to you now. It's just a lot of us don't trust that. So I wanted to write a story that was kind of about that. And having gone through a lot of personal tragedy over the last few years, including losing our child, our little girl that we adopted from Haiti, a lot of it had to do with healing and just sort of recognizing that help doesn't always come the way you want it. So that's what prompted the story. And then from there, I took it out to the ocean and an adventure story out in the middle of the sea and sharks and tidal waves and all that stuff. But it begins with an idea.
Wow. Well, yeah. Sorry about your loss with your adopted daughter there. That I can't even begin to imagine that. But I do think it's inspiring that you're able to, you have this outlet with your novels to sort of work through some of that stuff. And I really love the themes that you're talking about of how, those things that we thought might have been insignificant, or even we thought they were, tragic things at the time, and then you went on and met your wife and had kids, all that's a great theme.
Right.
And, as you're talking about, this person floating in that claims to be the Lord and stuff in the water, it sort of reminds me of like those great books, like, like The Alchemist or something, where people are, you know what I mean? Like, I think you're tapping into some larger stuff there. It's fantastic. Well, our listeners can't wait to check that out.
I try to do that in all of my books. I try to tap into something a little larger. Tuesdays with Morrie was obviously about the biggest issues, of what's important in life once you really know you're going to die, and aren't those same things important when we're living and when we're healthy. And by the way, Theater J is doing Tuesdays with Morrie, the play going on right now, and I'm also going to be down there November 30th for a talk at the what is it called, Ed Lavich D.C. JCC. I think I'm pronouncing it right. It's 16 and Q. So I'm going to be talking about this as well, and about that, and about the play, and about the new book. But to finish up the point that you just asked, in this case, I know that, Jason, for example, if I were to disappear from your program right now and suddenly my voice changed and it said, well, Mitch is gone, but this is the Lord, and I'm going to give you, Jason, 60 seconds. Ask me whatever questions you want. I'm sure you would have some pretty good questions, right? And I tried to put those questions into the mouths of the people, the survivors on this life raft, the castaways, who are a very diverse group, so that one of them asks, for example, well, if you're the Lord, do you answer every prayer? And he says, well, I answer every prayer, but sometimes the answer is no. And, that's something that I've sort of had to come to learn to accept in my life. Or there's a moment where, of course, the big question gets asked, why do you let people die? And one of the passengers who lost his wife said, why did you take my wife? And he says, well, I know that every time someone is lost here, you say, why did God take them? But maybe a better question would be, why did God give them to us in the first place? What did we do to warrant the beautiful memories and the sweetness and the kindness and all of that? And I know that when people die on this earth, you all weep for them when they leave it, but I can assure you they're not weeping. And, I write stuff like that sometimes to comfort myself as much as anybody reading it, because, as I say, when you lose a child, or I lost both my parents in the last 6 years, and you have to sort of come to some kind of grip with the universe about what it all means. And if you do believe that there is anything after this earth, whatever your belief system is, then you would believe that they're not crying, even though you are, and you're missing them. And so, I tried to take the philosophies that I've learned as the years have gone by from some wise people, or just from life itself, and put it into the characters that I create, and have those lessons sort of share with the reader.
Wow, perfectly said. I love that you deal with these big themes. You're unlocking parts of my brain, and our readers, when they're reading it, will unlock parts of their brain that they didn't even know they had by just trying to grapple with this stuff. I love that perspective. Well, cool. You mentioned the Theater J production of Tuesdays with Morrie in D.C. It'll run now through December 5th, and then you said you're going to come do that talk as well on the 30th. Remind our listeners, that was like your first book out of the gate. Remind us sort of where you were before you wrote that, your background as a sports writer, and deciding, I'm going to pen my first book here.
Yeah, it was quite a different place. It wasn't my first book. It was that's actually kind of what made it so unusual. I was a very, very aggressive, ambitious sports writer and sportscaster. I worked for ESPN, as well as the Detroit Free Press, as well as about 1,000 other little outlets that I did work for. And, I was never a sports nut. I'm still not. I don't memorize statistics, or I'm not encyclopedic with my knowledge of things. I'm pretty knowledgeable because I worked in it all these years, but I don't try to memorize who led the league in triples in 1944. It just doesn't matter to me that much. But I think I was attracted to writing about sports because it has all the elements of human drama. It has, and I always was more attracted to the losers than the winners. And some of my favorite sports columns that I have written had to do with people losing. And the empathy that people have for losers, I found, is much greater than they have for winners. I wrote a column once. I went to the Iditarod up in Alaska and covered every step of it, and wrote a column about the guy who came in dead last in the Iditarod, like 9 days later than everybody else, because he had lost a dog. He was a pharmacist from North Carolina, had never done this before, and just wanted to, always had read Call of the Wild and dreamed about it, and saved up all his money for years, and came up and ran the Iditarod with these dogs in a dog sled race. And partway through, one of the dogs ran away, and he had to stop and chase the dog for several days, because you're not allowed to go from one stop to the next without the same number of dogs that you had, or else you're disqualified. Because they otherwise, they feel that people could kill one of the dogs if the dog gets injured or slowed, and they don't want anybody to be encouraged to do that. So he had to chase this dog around Alaska wilderness for several days, not moving forward. And when he finished, and I talked to him, and I said, "You must have been so angry, at this dog that ran away, or you must have been so upset." And he said, "Oh, I was. If anything had ever happened to that dog, I never would have forgiven myself." And, that's what he was upset about, like maybe the dog would be hurt. And I just thought that was so beautiful. I wrote that story, and everybody, reacted to it, and everybody related to that. And nobody really cared who won the Iditarod, but they loved that column about, this guy who finished dead last, but because he had to chase a dog around the snowy outback of Alaska so that the dog wouldn't get hurt. And so I think even early in that stuff, I tried to find the humanity in sports that people could relate to. And it wasn't that big a jump, therefore, to try to find humanity in writing about an old man dying from Lou Gehrig's disease. But I had written 2 very successful sports books, and I was only interested kind of in that career and advancement of my career, and I really wasn't very concerned with any other issues. And then I happened to be flipping the remote control one night and came upon the Nightline program with Ted Koppel, and saw my old college professor, who I had loved when I was back in college at Brandeis University, a guy who I'd taken every class with, who I majored in sociology on account of, who I wrote my honors thesis with. And his name was Morrie Schwartz. And I had lost touch with him for 16 years while I was so busy preening myself, and trying to turn myself into, a little ambitious machine. And then I saw him on TV, and he was talking about what it was like to die from Lou Gehrig's disease. And that's how I found out that he only had a few months left to live. And I went to visit him, and then I went to visit him again and again and again. And all those visits were on Tuesdays. And I ended up turning it into a book to pay his medical bills. I didn't decide I was going to write a book or anything like that. He was in debt for his medical bills. And I decided, well, that's the only way I know maybe I can help him raise the money, and was able to find a publisher, even though most publishers said, "No, we're not interested. Who wants a book like that? It's depressing, it's boring. You're a sports writer," all kinds of reasons. But I kept pushing because it was for him. And we found one a few weeks before he died who was willing to publish it. And they gave us just enough money to pay his medical bills, which I gave to him. And that was supposed to be the end of it, And when he passed away, I wrote this little book. And then I was kind of aiming to go back to sports writing, but having been kind of changed by the time that I spent with him every Tuesday, and seeing what's really important in life once you're going to die, as I've said before. And I could realize that a lot of the things that were important, that he made important, I was not making important. I was chasing a lot of stuff that was not going to be of any comfort to me when I died. And it really opened my eyes, made me kind of take a right turn in my career. But then the book came out, and I was planning on going back to sports writing, and just, I didn't think anybody would buy the book. They only printed 20,000 copies of it. And it wasn't supposed to be even a blip on the radar screen. And then it took off, and somebody read it, and somebody read it, and somebody else read it, and they passed it on and passed it on and passed it on. And now Tuesdays with Morrie is the biggest selling memoir of all time. And that is certainly not anything I ever planned. And I don't think it's anything about my writing that's so brilliant. I think it's just the lessons that are in that book that everybody wants to embrace. And so that set me on a whole different path, because obviously that's what people wanted to talk to me about, what people wanted to publish me about. Everywhere I got stopped in an airport, people didn't want to talk about sports anymore. They wanted to talk about their mother died from cancer, and they read my book before she died, and could they share a picture of her or a story of her? So, my frame of mind changed, and my environment changed, my goals changed, and I haven't written a sports book since. And my writing now reflects sort of more of that. And I think in the play Tuesdays with Morrie, which I co-wrote with Jeffrey Hatcher, everybody will kind of see that transformation. But it's a lovely play. At the risk of saying something that I write is lovely, but it is. I've seen it now for 20 plus years. It's been performed, and it always has a nice effect on the audience. And it's beautiful to capture that relationship, which was very funny and sarcastic, and at times, and of course very poignant as Morrie gets closer and closer to the end. But usually the two actors end up having a great chemistry with one another, and I'm sure that'll be the case at the Theater J version of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of tailor-made for the stage. It's the conversation between these two people. So,
Yeah.
and in a way, I actually, you sort of laugh that you'd wrote two sports books. What was it? The autobiography of the football coach, Bo. How do you say it? Schembechler?
Yeah, Schembechler, yeah, and the Fab Five, yeah, basketball
Fab Five,
team.
yeah. That Chris Webber timeout still haunts me. I remember rooting for them back at, but yeah, the Michigan basketball team. But in a way, Tuesdays with Morrie, dealt with Lou Gehrig's disease. So Lou Gehrig, there's sort of a sports. It's a natural transition from sports into a much heavier topic there. And I love that you say all these people, cancer survivors and the like, coming up to you. I mean, you reached out to a whole wider audience with that. Well, so after that book comes out, you said the top selling memoir ever. I think it even became like a TV movie, right? Hank Azaria and Jack Lemmon, Emmy winner. So at that point, you're probably sitting there like, whoa, maybe this is my new life path. Maybe this is my personal legend. And then you decide, all right, maybe I'm going to go away from the sports thing again and do 5 people you meet in heaven. How did that idea come to you? You mentioned it a little earlier, but how did that idea come to you?
Well, Tuesdays with Morrie became such a runaway success and totally unpredicted. I mean, every month it was getting bigger and bigger, and we were going, this can't keep up, right? I mean, it's just a little book, and it kept getting bigger and bigger. And then they made the movie, and it got bigger and bigger, and it kind of paralyzed me for a while. And it took 6 years for me to write anything after Tuesdays with Morrie, book-wise, because I was so convinced that no matter what I wrote, it would pale in comparison to Tuesdays with Morrie. And I especially thought that about nonfiction. If I tried to find a true story that I really wanted to write about, people say, yeah, but that's not as interesting as Morrie was. And so I decided to just go the total opposite direction and try a novel and in fiction, which I had never tried before. And everybody said, you're nuts, you're crazy. People make that mistake all the time. They think they can write nonfiction, and then they think that they can write fiction. But I knew I'd always been a storyteller, and I'd been a songwriter and a musician before that, and I'd made transitions in my career before. And I remember they told me I was crazy to write Tuesdays with Morrie, and then that turned out well. So I said, well, I'm going to do it whether you think it's a good idea or not. And I had this old uncle of mine who I really adored. He was a World War II vet, a kind of Popeye character, really squat, muscular. Used to wear those beater T-shirts, but he'd tuck them in for dinner time, so we thought it was formal wear. We'd wear them to the dinner table, and he'd talk like this, and he fought in World War II, and he would always say, "Well, I'm a nobody, I'm a nothing. I'd never been nowhere that I wasn't shipped to with a rifle." That was his philosophy, and he died thinking that he was a nobody. But he used to tell this story around the Thanksgiving table about this night that he died on an operating table for a few seconds, one of those cases where they revive you. And he said that he remembered floating above the table and looking down at the operating table and his body. And then he saw all of his dead relatives waiting for him at the edge of the bed. And of course, as a kid, you say to him, "What did you do, Uncle Ed? What did you do?" And he said, "What did I do? I told him, get the hell out of here. I'm not ready for any of you yet." And apparently he scared them right back to heaven, and he went back into his body and he lived like another 10 years. But I never forgot that story, because I thought, well, that must be what happens when you die, because he would never tell me a lie. He's my uncle. He's not trying to sell a book or a philosophy, or he's not a medium or a psychic. He said, this is what happened. I believe that's what happened. So I took that idea of, people waiting for you when you die. But then I said, well, what if they're not all your relatives? What if some of them are just people who you had 5 minutes contact with on Earth, but
Right.
you changed their life forever and they changed yours? You think about if you're ever on a highway and you kind of start to drift and you drift into another lane and somebody bangs on the horn and you snap to it, you go, oh, and you just you veer away and you avoid an accident. Well, that person might have just saved your life, and by saving your life, you go on to become the president of the United States. That person therefore affected the history of America. And yet you don't even know who that person is. You don't even look at them, because when they beep at you, you never look over and see them in it, because you're embarrassed. And so that kind of loose connectedness that we have to everybody, I thought was a really interesting idea to explore. And I created these 5 people you meet in heaven who tell you about your life, and that went on to become a very successful novel. And from that point, nobody gave me a hard time about writing fiction anymore.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, you sort of proved you could, Tuesdays with Morrie proved you could do the nonfiction, top selling memoir ever. And then 5 People You Meet in Heaven is probably arguably your most iconic, fiction work.
Right.
Of all the ones you've written after that, I mean, I seriously would go through these one at a time, but I don't want to keep you here all day. But I'll list them for one more day. Have a Little Faith, The Timekeeper, First Phone Call from Heaven, Magic Strings of Frankie Pesto, The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, and Finding Chica. Of all of those ones after that, do you have one that is like personally touches you the most, that makes you say, wow, I'm most proud of that? I want our readers to go check that out. Maybe they missed one of those, to go back and read.
Well, probably Finding Chica, which was a true story. So of all those books, I've written 10 now. 3 are nonfiction and 7 are novels. And the nonfiction are Tuesdays with Morrie, Have a Little Faith, and Finding Chica, which is my most recent one until this new one, The Stranger in the Lifeboat. And Finding Chica is a story of not only how I got involved in Haiti and took over an orphanage, and which I still run to this day and will the rest of my life. And I'm there every month. We have 53 kids that we raise there at this orphanage, and they're beautiful, amazing kids. But it's the story of how you become a family accidentally late in life. When my wife and I adopted one of our kids there, when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor at age 5. And suddenly we had no choice. She was living with us and sleeping at the foot of our bed as a 5-year-old. And we were, having never had kids of our own, even though we've got 53 kids now in the orphanage. But suddenly we had this little girl with us every minute of the day. And for 2 years, it was just this amazing experience. And even though in the end, no one could save her from this brain tumor. It's called DIPG, and nobody lives with DIPG. Most kids are dead after 4 or 5 months. But she lived 2 years, and it was an amazing 2 years that we traveled around the world with her, trying to get her cured. And meanwhile, I had this amazing family experience. And I'm most proud of that book. I think it's the best book I've ever written in terms of writing, because I just threw myself into it, and I dedicated it to her, obviously. And it's told like in the second person. It's me talking to her the whole time. And it's not a scary, oh, the kid's going to die at the end book, because from the very first page, you already know that she died, and she's coming back to visit me. And we're having this discussion, and she's telling me, well, why don't you write a book about me if you're going to write a book? And, she talks just like a 5-year-old talks. And there's all these discussions between us throughout the course of the book that way. And I tell her what she meant to us and how she changed us during that time. And anybody who's ever had a child, or anyone who's ever, become a family in an odd way, through adoption, through fostering, through accident, or whatever, could certainly relate to the ways that, families are like works of art. You can make them from any kind of material. And I'm very partial to that book. I always wanted that, and I probably always will want that to be my best book, because she deserves that. So, for me personally, that's my most personal one. And with all respect to Tuesdays with Morrie, obviously, and what it means and how it changed my career and how much I love Morrie. But this was, I always say, Finding Chica is kind of the bookend to Tuesdays with Morrie, because it was 25 years later. And in one case, I was sitting alongside an old dying man who was teaching me amazing lessons about life. And Finding Chica, I was sitting alongside towards the end as she passed away, a dying 7-year-old girl who also taught me more about life than anybody probably shy of Morrie. So that's my answer.
Wow. Yeah. It'd probably be hard to top personal connection for you to top that book. Well, I mean, I just think your career is so fascinating, and you've been generous with your time, so we'll bow out here. But thanks so much for joining us here for a full half hour. This was great. Again, everyone, Mitch Albom's new book, "The Stranger in the Lifeboat," is out now. So pick it up here for the holiday season. Maybe a good gift for someone. And then don't miss Tuesdays with Morrie at Theater J here in DC, the stage version. That if you read the book, loved it, or if you've never seen it, it'll be a touching show to go see for sure. So, hey, Mitch, thanks so much for doing this. This is a blast.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. Also, just let me add that I'm going to do a talk at Theater J on November 30th at 7:30. And actually, I think they're selling tickets for that you get a copy of the book with the ticket. So you could kill a couple birds with one stone and get a chance to do a longer talk about the whole, probably Tuesdays with Morrie, as well as The Stranger in the Lifeboat at 7:30 on November 30th at the Ed Lavich DC JCC over at 16th and Q. So maybe I'll get a chance to see you, Jason, if you come by.
Are you going to do the whole talk sitting in a lifeboat?
I hadn't thought of that. That would be a good prop. I could just kind of sit in a boat with an oar and tell the story. You've given me a great idea there. Let's see how the theater can handle it.
Yeah, but I don't know if it'll be really comfortable. But all right, cool. Well, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to even the next book. Keep those ideas churning. You're great.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thanks so much for joining us on Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time. I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.